Byblos, Tyre is a Canaanite or Phoenician city. The term Phoenician was used by the Greeks when referring to the Canaanite peoples they interacted with and who primarily lived in cities along the central coast of the eastern Mediterranean Sea. In comparison to Sidon and Byblos, Tyre was established much later, and although some scholars believe there are references to the settlement in tablets from the archives of Ebla dating to about 2700 BC, this hasn't definitively been confirmed. It's actually not until the Late Bronze Age, around 1500 BC, that the city appears in texts from Ugarit and Egypt. The ancient political entity that we know of as Tyre was actually made up of two components: the city of Tyre itself, which was on an island just 2 kilometers off the coast of Canaan, and another part on the mainland itself called Usha, which supplied Tyre with food and resources. The Egyptians called Tyre Suru, and during the New Kingdom era, the city was one of Egypt's most important vassal states in the Levant. It was also one of the wealthiest. Tyre appears several times in the well-known collection of diplomatic correspondence known as the Amarna letters. In one such letter, the city's then ruler or prince, Abi-Milki, writes to Pharaoh Amenhotep IV, better known as Akhenaten, to inform him of the alleged disloyalty of Egypt's other Canaanite vassals, most notably the ruler of Sidon, Zimreda. We actually briefly met both Abu-Milki and Zimreda in the previous program on Sidon, which I'll link to in the video description. According to Abi-Milki, Sidon had not only sent men to cut off the city's food and water supply from Usha on the mainland, but also planned to attack Tyre with the help from warlords associated with Abdiasherta and his son, Aziru, the mafia boss or pirate rulers who controlled the relatively lawless land of Amuru to the north. In one of his letters to the pharaoh, Abi-Milki tells him the following: "Furthermore, since the departure of the troops of the king, my lord, from me, the ruler of the city of Sidon does not let me or my men go down to the land to take wood supplies or to take water for drinking. He killed one man, and he took another. 80 shekels, tax for my men, Zimreda, the ruler of the city of Sidon, and the criminal, Aziru, have taken." Though Sidon and the warlords of Amuru proved to be Tyre's great regional rivals, the relationship with Byblos was generally a much more cordial one. In fact, its longtime ruler, Ribhada, was related, at least through marriage, though some also say by blood, to the ruler and prince of Tyre, though whether or not this individual was Abi-Milki can't be confirmed. What we do know from Ribhada's letters to Akhenaten is that things got so bad in Tyre that its people, supposedly instigated by Abdiasherta, murdered their ruler, who was also married to Ribhada's sister. The letter from Ribhada outlining this incident goes as follows: "I made a marriage alliance with the city of Tyre. They were in good relations with me. Behold, they killed their city ruler with my sister and her children. I had sent the daughters of my sister to Tyre, away from Abdiasherta, and they killed him with my sister and his house." Tyre ended up surviving the political instability of the Amarna period, as well as attacks from Hittite forces that sought to wrestle control of the region from Egypt. The city remained a vassal of Egypt until the end of the events of the Late Bronze Age collapse. Like Sidon and Byblos, the city seems to have remained unharmed during a time when most other major cities in the eastern Mediterranean were being devastated by the roving bands of migrants and marauders that historians conveniently call the Sea Peoples. In fact, after the Bronze Age and into the early Iron Age, Tyre outshined cities such as Sidon to become the most prosperous and influential of all the Phoenician cities. By 900 BC, it had trading links and colonies on the nearby island of Cyprus, and was sending ships to explore and trade with the peoples of northern Africa, Sicily, southern France, and Spain, just to name a few. In many of these places, the Tyrians set up trading posts, if not full-fledged colonies, the most famous of which was Carthage, today on the coast of Tunisia. Despite Tyre's success and fame, politically, it and other Phoenician cities were subservient to Assyria after the 8th century BC. The Neo-Assyrian kings, though, didn't want to interrupt the lucrative trade that cities such as Tyre engaged in so well, especially since now they benefited from it. And so, as long as the rulers of Tyre accepted Assyrian overlordship and paid the required tribute demanded of them, they were granted a good deal of autonomy relative to other areas under Assyrian control. However, any refusal to meet their tribute obligations or attempts to resist Assyrian authority was met with harsh punishments, including the deportation of the local population elsewhere. For the most part, the Tyrians were too busy making money to join the rebellions of their neighbors, and the tribute that they did offer to the Assyrians was sporadic and not too overbearing. But around 700 BC, when the Assyrian king Sennacherib changed the rules and demanded regular annual tribute, Tyre, along with other Phoenician cities, rebelled in full force. Sennacherib took Usha, but left the island of Tyre alone, since taking it over would have required a significant number of men that were needed to subdue rebellions elsewhere, such as in Lachish and Jerusalem. Still, war was bad for business, and though Tyre could rely somewhat on its overseas colonies and trading posts for support, being cut off from the mainland, especially Usha, substantially hurt the city economically. And so, Tyre's ruler, a king named Baal, made a treaty with Sennacherib's son and successor, Esarhaddon. In it, King Baal had to acknowledge that he was Esarhaddon's and Assyria's loyal servant, but in return, he was given control of several ports, including Byblos, Akko, and Dor. Perhaps Baal's dignity was worth more to him than these lands, because eventually he broke his oath of fealty to Esarhaddon and joined forces with Egypt and its Kushite pharaoh, Taharqa, to oust the Assyrians from the region. Baal's betrayal was noted by Esarhaddon in an inscription. "In the course of my campaign, I set up fortifications against Baal, the king of Tyre, who trusted his friend Taharqa, the king of Cush, and kept answering me with insolence. I cut off the supply of food and water that sustained their lives." But the coalition proved no match for the Assyrian army, and eventually Esarhaddon defeated all of his rivals by not only subduing the Phoenician coast, but also marching into Egypt and conquering it. Another one of his inscriptions states, "I conquered Tyre, which is in the midst of the sea, and took away all of the cities and possessions of Baal, its king, who had trusted in Taharqa, king of Cush." Whether or not Esarhaddon actually conquered the island of Tyre is debated, because just a few years later, under Assyria's next king, Ashurbanipal, the city rebelled yet again under the same king, Baal. This time, though, the Assyrians seem to not only have cut off Tyre by land, but blockaded it by sea as well. Baal offered his allegiance to Ashurbanipal and Assyria yet again, and this time it might have been for good. In an inscription, Ashurbanipal tells us his side of the story. "In my third campaign, I marched against Baal, king of Tyre, who lives on an island amidst the sea, because he did not heed my royal order, did not listen to my personal commands. I surrounded him with redoubts, seized his communications on sea and land. I thus intercepted and made scarce their food supply, and forced them to submit to my yoke. He brought his own daughter and the daughters of his brothers before me to do menial services. At the same time, he brought his son, Iyahi Milki, who had not yet crossed the sea, to greet me as my slave. I had mercy upon him, and returned him the son, the offspring of his loins. When the Neo-Assyrian Empire finally fell around 610 BC, most, if not all of its former territories in the Levant were taken over by the Neo-Babylonian Empire. According to the historian Josephus, Tyre withstood the assaults of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II for 13 years. Eventually, the two sides came to an agreement whereby Tyre would be given some autonomy and be ruled by its own kings in exchange for the Tyrians providing ships for the Babylonian navy. When in 539 BC, the Persian king, Cyrus the Great, conquered the Neo-Babylonian Empire's capital of Babylon, Tyre and the other Phoenician cities became part of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. For the most part, the people of Tyre remained loyal to the Persian King of Kings. The Tyrian navy also provided ships for nearly all of Persia's campaigns against Greece and other parts of the Mediterranean, the one exception being during the reign of Cambyses II. According to Herodotus, Cambyses wanted to launch a campaign against the Carthaginians, but since Carthage had been founded by settlers from Tyre, the Tyrians refused. According to the ancient historian Diodorus Siculus, Tyre was part of a rebellion during the reign of Artaxerxes III, but resolutely stepped back into the Achaemenid fold once Sidon, whose king was the revolt's leader, was brutally suppressed. Tragedy struck Tyre in 332 BC when Alexander of Macedonia came to Phoenicia. The historian Arrian tells us, "Thence he proceeded towards Tyre, and on the way, Tyrian envoys met him, sent by the community to say that Tyre had decided to accept Alexander's orders." However, when Alexander wished to offer a sacrifice to Heracles in Tyre's great temple, he was refused. Insulted and outraged, Alexander vowed to take the city. Since in the past, the island of Tyre had been able to resist invaders such as the Assyrians and Babylonians, Tyre's rulers probably assumed that they could also withstand an assault from Alexander. How very wrong they were. After what was reportedly a 7-month-long blockade and siege, during which he had his men build a causeway from Usha to the island, Alexander finally entered Tyre and killed many of its inhabitants. The 30,000 or so Tyrians who survived were sold into slavery, after which Alexander was finally able to make his sacrifice. Eventually, the city was rebuilt and became an important port during the Seleucid era, but by then, Tyre's Canaanite, Phoenician identity had all but disappeared. The city had been completely Hellenized by the time the Romans annexed it in 64 BC. So I hope that this short program gave you a glimpse into some of the more interesting highlights of the history of Tyre. There's lots more on the way, so please subscribe and stay tuned.